We're back with Taking the Reins, the preview show, and you know what that means? It means we're up for another summer festival meeting. It's our 4th of 9, and it's the big one. It's the one we've been building up to. It's the top of the sophomore classic crop, and we've got the Hollywoodbets Cape Guineas to look forward to with what is being touted as one of the races of the decade. Charles Dickens versus Cousin Casey, but we've got a betting bonanza and a carryover pick six, as well as a quartet carryover for the main event. And we have got a lot of fantastic racing, a bumper 11 race card. And with all that being said, bearing in mind that the starting events are juvenile races, we have brought in none other than Jonathan Snaith to assist us and take us through the Snaith racing runners and your other thoughts on the crowd, on the card. Jono, thank you for joining us and welcome. What have you made so far of the build-up, obviously, with the main event?
Yeah, it's just been a fantastic, to have horses like this in the system is just incredible. And to have two horses like Cousin Casey and Charles Dickens and Shoemaker and a couple of the Joburg horses, I think this is the best Cape Guineas we've seen in a long, long time. So it's an exciting race. And this is what racing pundits want to see, is these amazing superstars coming through the ranks. And, Charles Dickens has been touted the next horse chestnut. I think this course is going to be packed on Saturday, and mostly to come see this clash.
Absolutely. And another thing that we've seen, a common theme throughout the summer season so far, is the juvenile racing, which has really taken a major step up in terms of attendance and performances from the 2-year-olds. We're seeing bumper fields. We have these two new feature races, so-called features. I suppose they're non-black type events, one for the fillies and one for Colts and fillies, an open race. And we'll open up with race 2, which is the Hollywoodbets Summer Coronation Plate, which is restricted to the fillies. A whole bunch of first-timers to run through here, and a couple of horses that did partake in the opening juvenile event of the season. And Jonathan, we're going to go to the replay here of Miss Hannigan, who won. Obviously, your 900-meter scurry events that we see as the openers for the juveniles every season leading up into this race. And Miss Hannigan, trained by Gareth van Zyl, is coming through the middle there and wins a very good event. Renews rivalry with the 8-horse, the Charleston, who does manage to run third in this event, beaten about 3 lengths. You'll see that in the Barry Irwin Team Valor colours running on at the death. And Jono, you've got obviously a bunch of the unraced horses. I think 3 of them is in this event after the scratching of the 5 among the clowns. Do you want to run through them and just let us know where you think they are in their prep, their levels of precocity, etc.? What do you make of the Snaith Racing trio of horses in the Summer Coronation?
Justin, we've got a horse called Vitblitz who, Denon Platina, they're very highly regarded, and she's got a lot of pace. I do think she can sneak into the money. I do think Miss Hannigan's going to take some beating, even though some of these horses, have a weight advantage. And I like the way it won on debut. And although the Charleston ran on strongly, I think that it wasn't fancied on debut. It drifted out. Hasn't obviously shown that much at home. It's going to have to improve a lot. And of our other runners, Golden Pacific, shown quite a bit at home, can run into the money. And I think this is quite an open race and could, something could upset you. I think it's a really open, second race. And I think that you probably want to go a little bit wide here. And it could be a quartet race for me.
I think so. It looks very open, and it would be remiss of us not to give a little bit of background and more information on some of the other first-timers. We've managed to get a couple of comments from trainers, and I think we'd have to look at a horse like number 6, Articuno. I've spoken to Brett Crawford. Now, this particular horse was a 750,000 Rand purchase at the Cape Racing Ready to Run sale, meaning, Jono, that these horses we've seen off these sales, Miss Hannigan was one. They've been through a little bit more preparation than some of the others a lot of the time, because they've grassed a couple of times going into the sale. And then you'd imagine after seeing the pens post-sale into the race that, they do bring a little bit of experience into the race, and they usually have an added advantage.
That's actually my fancy for the race, Justin, and you would know more being close to the stable. That, and I see there's a little bit of money for it as well. So I think that's the one for me in this race. I think it's still good value out there. And, from our stable, it's probably the race we're not that particularly strong in. And I know Justin's more bullish of his runners in the 3rd race.
Yeah.
So I think you're on the right wicket here, and I think that's the one.
I think look out for that runner, yeah, Articuno. She galloped very, very well. Lawrence Verner's purchased her for the Brett Crawford stable, and being out of a group-winning juvenile in Manamu, sister to Mythical Flight, there's a lot of speed in that family. She's a really strong, forward-looking filly. The report from Brett was that if she doesn't miss the break too far, she's going to be right involved in the finish. So a bit of confidence there. And then, of course, number 10, Winter Cloud, is a full sister to Clouds Unfold. Also, once again, a pretty confident comment coming from the Bass Robinson yard. If not too green, really can be in the shake-up. Not the type of horse that's been pressed for a strike first time out, but is showing enough athletic ability to show that she could definitely be involved in the finish. But you spoke about the third race, so let's move on to the open event, which is obviously dominated by colts. Slightly less first timers in race 3, the Hollywoodbets Commonwealth Plate. Jonathan, take us through your runners there.
Justin, I think it's a tricky race, is in that, you know, the Icy Blast was very strongly fancied on debut and ran accordingly. It was beaten by a very smart horse of Justin's. And I think that's going to take a lot of beating. I think it's going to improve. And, you know, Vaughan is a master of these juvenile races. So for me, that's going to take a lot of beating in this race. But of Justin's runners, I know Jewel Cat was, you know, fancied to run a place on debut, ran a terrific race. And I do think it'll be in the money. Speaking to Andrew Brand on the way here, and I see there's a little bit of money for Captain Arrow, the one horse, and from Candice Bass, and I think that they are quite bullish, he tells me. So that's got to go into your sort of perms. And there's a horse I quite like, a sneaker here called William West. Bernard Up. Its gallops have been really solid, and I think he could surprise. He must be absolutely any price. And obviously Speeding Bullet, who ran third, just behind Icy Blast on debut. He was quite ready for that race. I don't think he's going to improve that much, but he's got to have winning claims on that run. But I do think, you know, Icy Blast might have him held here, and he's probably the one to go for.
Well, let's quickly go to that rerun, because we've got Icy Blast here. He does make the speed, and chatting to Vaughan before this race, he felt like this horse has got a lot of ability and a big, big future. Although he was probably one gallop short of being very confident of him winning first time out. You see he goes for home here, and he goes to beat Speeding Bullet, who he renews rivalry with. And then, Jono, as you said, your stable companion, really making up big ground. As Icy Blast goes to defeat the third horse, the stable companion comes over the top, a very, very smart horse, and wins it. And as you said there as well, I think this race is slightly different. I think these raced horses probably have the measure of the first timers, but a lot of money and a lot of respect for number 1, Captain Arrow. The stable is very confident of a big run. He is a half to Scalini, who is a more than decent 3-year-old as well, and captain of all we know can throw a precocious type. So, and very, very nice, strong field for the very first running of the Hollywoodbets Commonwealth Plate. Look to Icy Blast and Speeding Bullet, with Captain Arrow the biggest danger of the first timers. After this, we'll be back with the main event. We're back with the main event. It's the Hollywoodbets Cape Guineas, run for no less than 2 million rand this year. Never mind the stake, never mind the history of the race. We have got 2 horses taking each other on here that would be 3, 4 to 10 shots in any given crop. They, unfortunately, but fortunately for us, bump each other, and that's Charles Dickens and Cousin Casey. And it doesn't stop there, as Jonathan said earlier. We would be disrespecting the other runners that come in with super credentials. And, you know, Jono, we talk about the wind up this track all the time. There is some big rain and stormy weather predicted for Friday. And I think if the rain gets beaten off on Saturday, there's still a big chance of a gale force wind at the absolute best case scenario. We were talking about it a few weeks back. The going of the track, very fair all the way throughout the straight, but it is that wind when the jockeys come towards the outside rail to try and get away from being exposed to the inside. Badly drawn horses that are coming from off the pace most of the time, Charles Dickens, Cousin Casey. What do you think is going to happen with the running of the race?
I think that it's going to be a very interesting. If you look at Friday, there's going to be a lot of rain on the track. So it's going to be sort of probably good to soft come Saturday. Although the rain clears up on Saturday, the wind arrives. So it looks like a gale force headwind. And that might change, you know, we're a few days out, and hopefully the weather will change by Saturday for the event. But if it's going to be a strong headwind, you've got to be taken into account that these horses that are going to track to the outside no matter what. I just see that I don't think the guy's going to go in, but throughout the day you can kind of gauge it by the first couple of races for the punters. And if everyone's going to the outside, you've got to take that into account, because you're going to have horses like Cousin Casey drawn 14 and Charles Dickens drawn 11. They do come from off the pace, and they might get bulk for a run. That's just, the luck of the running, and you've got to, any horse can get beat when that happens, and no matter how good you are. So you either play a pick six where you bank a horse like Charles Dickens, which probably any day of the week would win. But if you want to go wide, chuck in a couple of horses and look for the upset. So you could almost pay 2 perms in terms of the pick six on the day, bankering Charles Dickens, and then probably going 4 or 5 horses in another perm.
Let's jump straight into the reruns, because we got Charles Dickens winning. And, this was a race where he's taken on a bunch of older horses. Jono, they're obviously in the red cap, and he just travels up to the last minute. Everything's off the bit. And he goes on and he wins a very, very impressive race. What have you made of this horse from the outside looking in?
Well, watching him now, the way he wins, he's winning in an absolute canter. He hasn't even asked the question yet. So there's still a little bit of room for improvement on this run, which is quite astonishing. So if he produces this sort of effort on the day and everything goes his way in terms of the luck in the running, he's going to take a power beating, and that's why he's sitting at, I think, 40-10 odds. So, but I've seen racing many a time, and you've got to have luck, especially in a big field. All the races he's won to date have relatively been sort of 8-horse fields or under.
Yep.
So there's going to be a genuine pace, and there's going to be a lot of scrummaging for that outside rail if there's a headwind, and it's going to be interesting. So it's going to be older, it's going to have to be really, really awake on the day, which he normally is a top rider, and hopefully things go their way, and he proves that he is the best.
Yeah, well, that is definitely the case. It's a lot easier to run past 3 horses when you're off the pace than it is 13, which could be the case in the big race. But let's go into Cousin Casey. Ravi Naidu has been staying publicly, and he's pretty much summed it up. He's got a Group 2, Group 1 winning champion juvenile coming into a race as an underdog, and I think that sums up the quality of the field. But here, Cape Hunters Cup last time, Jono, I think worth noting At My Command in the black cap, where he comes from as well. Cousin Casey there through the middle in the white and blue really quick and shows that turn of foot he showed in all the juvenile races. And a lot of other horses here all renewing rivalry, Le Morne as well. But how impressed have you been with Cousin Casey over his career so far?
He hasn't put a foot wrong, so he's probably been, a little bit discarded, in terms of any other day of the week he'd be the even money favourite in this race. And it's just the way that Charles Dickens has won his races and the way his preparation's gone that has taken the limelight off a horse like this, because he's probably the worthy favourite in terms of form, and make no mistake, he's going to deliver a big effort. He isn't drawn very well at 14, but Grant is a big race rider. He knows how to deliver them on the big day, and this horse is a serious horse, so he can't be written off, and he's got to be included in all your bets, in my opinion.
And the Crawford pair of horses just behind him, At My Command did it hard from draw 15 coming from the back. Le Morne also did it coming from the back. Has to do it again because he's drawn badly here as well.
At My Command has really impressed me in his last 2 runs. He was drawn, I think, 11 out of 11 when he took on Charles Dickens. He went to the front, went wide around the field, and he was still, 100 to go, he was hanging on, and Charles Dickens just got him that last bit and won well. But he did it the hard way, and in his subsequent start, he was drawn, I think, 15 out of 15. And if you saw in that rerun, he came from the absolute cloud. So, he's a 20-to-1 shot. I think that's awesome each-way value. And I think he's drawn 1 with Keegan de Mello up, and that combo and Lady Laylaw in such hot form at the moment. And, I just think that this is the value horse for the race, and at 21, it's the wrong price.
And bearing in mind, we've obviously got a quartet carryover for this big race as well. So I think it's very important to identify horses that can fill those minor berths. Now, what about the Johannesburg runners? Obviously, Mark de Kock has a phenomenal record of raiding horses for the Cape Guineas historically. He's won pretty much more than the local trainers, and at least I think Dean Caname and him have trained the most over the last 2 decades, and closely followed by Vaughan Marshall and your training operation. Obviously, it's quite hard to dissect the form of the Joburg horses versus the Cape Town ones until they actually do meet against each other. No doubt about it, Shoemaker and Union Square, very, very talented horses in their own right and bumping a stellar crop of Cape horses. Have you been watching those races up there? I'm sure you caught the replay of the Dingons. Union Square, he's a big son of Rafif, big scopy horse, big galloper, and Shoemaker's had a lot of hard luck stories in his races as well.
I think Shoemaker, his penultimate he was very unlucky, and I watched his last run expecting a much better effort. I think everything went sort of his way in his last start, and I was a little bit disappointed he didn't win. But you can't write Mike de Kock off in any Group 1. You write him off at your own peril. He's a master He doesn't come here for, he doesn't come all the way to Cape Town to play golf. Well, he does that too, but he wants to win a race like this, and he's chatting to Richard Fourie. This is a serious horse. And I actually chatted to Bernard Fader this morning about something else, and he mentioned that this horse has been putting in some amazing work at home. So he's obviously a class act, and I think of Mike's his pair here, I do prefer Shoemaker, and Bernard, big race rider, and he could, if something goes wrong in the race, everyone's tracking to the outside and people don't get a run, this kind of horse could pop up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it would be remiss of us not to mention the Hollywood Syndicate horse, Anfield's Rocket, who also represents that Johannesburg form, has done absolutely nothing wrong, was the winner of the Graham Beck when Shoemaker was unlucky and couldn't get a run. Also, Jono, I think it's worth touching on, as we said earlier, about the theme of the quartets for this race. You've got a horse in here that I quite like long term, maybe not specifically for this race, but this horse, number 6, Royal Aussie, who's a Gold Rush candidate for Suzette and Barcy Viljoen. I mean, he ran a pretty good third in the Ready to Run, where you guys reported that a slight hiccup going into that race. His last start was obviously in a 6 furlong, and he ran a pretty good second. The mile, I think, is probably his premium, if not maybe his minimum trip. And he's got a decent draw here with Richard up. I mean, he's never run a bad race in his life. He's got to have place chance as well.
Yeah, I think he's got an outside place chance. At the ratings, he's actually tipped to, I think, run second last, if you look at the ratings. And I think he's going to run a lot better than that. Do I think he can win a race like this? Probably not. I don't think he's at that level. But I think he's a major candidate for the Gold Rush race, looking at the log. And I think this is kind of a prep into that race. And Richard, will give him a big chance in this race. But he's got a great draw. And with some luck in the running, he could sneak into the minor money for sure.
Well, just touching on the final thing before we close this segment, I think we've alluded to the weather conditions, and pace is also very important in this race. And I think it's lacking in genuine front runners for the most part, although in saying that, this horse of Vaughan Marshall's, number 12, Dave the King, he got after the pacemaker last time, and he faded a little bit. He looks like a horse, he shows a lot of speed in a 12 and a 14. He went a mile and he didn't quite see it through. From a deep draw 12, you'd imagine that he's probably going to be very close to the speed.
I'm not sure about that. I think Vaughan might have looked at that last run and thought maybe he was actually, you could see he was kind of done furlong out, and maybe he wants to reserve him a bit more. And because he actually ran a great race considering how hard he went. And I think he's a horse that could run a top race here if you just get him, even it's up on the pace, but just get him covered rather than lead. And I think in these sort of 15 horse fields that you're almost guaranteed of pace, because you've got some horses out there wide that are looking to get a decent position early on. So I think just by default, there are going to be guys chasing around the field, trying to get up there, and that will create the pace. What happens, sort of 400-600 meters into a race, they might settle and they might go a bit slower. But initially, I think the pace will be on, and I think it'll be a true run race. And, everyone's come here to see Charles Dickens and his cousin Casey clash, and I hope they get their money's worth to everyone that comes down to Kenilworth. And I would love nothing more, to see this Charles Dickens, become the new icon of South African racing, because we need that those stars like, Jet Dark going for 3 Queen's Plates in a row, do it again, going for 3 Julys in a row. That's what creates the enthusiasm with the punters and the followers in racing worldwide. And we need those superstars. So hopefully we'll see a superstar being born in this race.
Absolutely, Jonathan Snaith, fantastically summed up. That's the Hollywoodbets Cape Guineas. We'll be back with the final features after this. The Ridgemont Highlands Peninsula Handicap is race 9. Bumper 16 horse field, purposely been placed as the last leg of the pick 6. Hopefully by now we'll have some people on some rather large looking ticket payouts. Jono, this race is a true handicap. It's quite competitive every year. I think historically in this race you would find you guys would be very good at preparing a very underrated horse. Bulgarian, and springs to mind. Whereas this year it looks very open. There doesn't look to be too many horses that are well undervalued, maybe 1 or 2. How do you make it? What do you think are the leading lights in the Peninsula?
Well, the horse I know Justin's kept behind specifically for this race is One Way Traffic. And, he hasn't got the best of draws. You can ignore his last run. He's a very good horse. If you think about his penultimate, where he won in Durban, it was super impressive. A lot of people said he should have run in the July. And he's a serious horse, and I think he's sitting at 25 to 1. And I think there's some great value there for an each way bet. And the horses I like here are actually the value bets. I like Winchester Mansion sitting at 10-1. So I think this is an open race being a handicap. I think there are a lot of horses with chances here. And like you said earlier, it's very difficult to work out the collateral form with the sort of the Raiders. And I've noticed that over the last couple of meetings in Cape Town, where you've got a horse that comes into a handicap and never run here, and they subsequently win or run poorly. So it's really hard to work out a balance. And, all you could do really is put in some Raiders with form and hope for the best. But this is a tricky race. And I think there could well be an upset in this leg of the Pick Six.
Yeah, and one of those horses is Peter Muscat's Hollywood Syndicate runner, Imelenzi Yokotaduma. I mean, he beat your horse Steinbeck, and third in that race was Silvano's Dasher, who came out to win the other day when he came back a furlong and trip, and he won very, very well. So he's a horse with 52 kilos. He's got to have a chance for the raiding yard. But let's take in a rerun here. Let's go back to Silvano's time, Jono. Here you'll see your horse Somerset Morm, who's running in the second position. I think quite a good form line here. This probably will be prevalent. Quite an up-and-coming horse, this, Jono. I mean, Dean's horses, they tend to get better with age, a lot of them, especially these Silvano types. And Somerset Morm, I mean, he's a horse himself who's coming into his own as a 5-year-old, and they've run very, very close here. Unfortunately, both of them don't have the best of draws, but I think along with those horses that you've touched on, Winchester, Mancha, etc., there's Warriors also running a big race there. What do you give chances, Somerset Morm? What do you make of him? Is this maybe just one little step, a little bit too hard for him to win? Is he in the mix?
I think all these horses are kind of on the same level. We've got Hunt Solo, they fought it out at Dermville, and I think it was the Settlers. Yeah. And they kind of hold against these older horses. I think these sort of, a horse like One Way Traffic, I think if he gets into his gear, I think he's probably a little bit better than a horse like Somerset Morm, but you've got to include Somerset Morm because his last 3 runs have been superb. He's never out the money, and there's a lot of very consistent horses here. And once again, with a big field like this, there's going to be a lot of luck in the running. And this is not a race you want to go short in. So for the exotic bet, you've got to chuck in a few here because the better horses that I fancy certainly are drawn wide. So I think it's a race that you want to go a little bit wider. And Warrior, obviously, a horse that this is an optimal trip, 1,800 meters. He loves this course and distance, and I think his last run was sort of a return to form run, and I do think he's going to bounce back to his best in this race.
One horse that I think you definitely got to include in your pick sixes would be number 11, Future Prince. I mean, he's a now 4-year-old who had a very good season as a 3-year-old in the Winter Series races. He was only 3 lengths behind Captain's Ransom in 4th last time. Carries bottom weight here, and I think must be included in the pick 6. Jono, let's move on to the Hollywoodbets Victress Stakes, Group 3. This is a race for fillies and mares. Now, this is a category in a division which is a little light in population. We saw the Summer Bowl also attract a pretty smallish field, but one thing we've seen is there's more than one Group 1 winner and Group 1 type of candidates in these races, and this race is no different. We've lost number 1, Rein in Holland, who has been scratched. Prepped in Johannesburg a few days ago and will be coming down on Lomran's King's Plate Day, and we will see her later on in the season, and she'll add an interesting angle to these fillies races. But let's go quickly back to this rerun here of Marina last time. Now she's running second in behind Make It Snappy. Shanzanette is in this race as well. What we didn't know here was we were looking at the future WSB Cape Fillies Guineas winner out in front, Make It Snappy. Jono, up the inside there, Marina and Shanzanette make their runs. How do you see them rematching each other here over the 1800?
I really fancy Marina in this event. I think she's got a coming on look about her, and I think we haven't seen the best of her. And I think she keeps improving. And if you look at the winner here, she subsequently went on to win the Guineas and win it well. And I actually, I gave her a big chance in the Guineas based on her run to Marina. And I think Marina's one of the best staying fillies in the country, and serious run in the Cartier Paddock Stakes. And I make the horse to beat in this race. And Chantenay, the stable still hasn't found their rhythm yet. They've been off form for I think for the last 3 months. So they seem to have a winner or two in the last 2 meetings. So hopefully they'll come to form. But I think Candace is going to take a lot of beating here. But a horse I do like for an outside fancy bet is Bye Bye Bombshell. She was very unlucky in the Willavington, and I think that her last run over the sprint was an eye-catching performance. It's a small field, and I think she could pop up for the places. And obviously Silver Darling is the Willavington Group 1 winner, but her last run was just disappointing for me. I thought she'd produce a much better effort, and she does seem held by these older fillies.
Yeah, and I remember Justin was quite bullish of a big run from Silver Darling last time. She just didn't quite fire and let down in that last furlong like Marina did. But obviously, you know, Shanzanette, I mean, she's the interesting one here, obviously, up against Marina. I mean, in her 3-year-old career, she had a phenomenal season. She almost took down Captain's Ransom on, I think, 2 occasions, and once was over the course and distance in the Paddock Stakes, where she was a short head second behind. Unfortunately, in her comeback now, after that season, she has flattered to deceive a little bit, and she's obviously been running quite a way below her 123 rating she started with this season. But you know, if she comes to her best, you touched on there, her stable's been a little bit off fire. They've started to have a few winners, so that could be an indication that the horses are coming back to hand and back to their best. And if so, then obviously she's going to be a big competitor for Marina.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at her earlier form, I was shocked, you know, to learn that she wasn't going to Durban, because I made her an absolute sitter in the Willamington. But, you know, Justin didn't complain because he eventually won the race. I don't think Silver Darling would have beaten her on form. And, you know, if you look at her earlier form, where she almost beat Captain's Ransom here I think was the Paddock Stakes, was a phenomenal effort. So she is a class act, and she hasn't, since she's come back, impressed, you know, and even at Durban when she ran there, it's just not her earlier form. So whether she finds a form here or not, she's going to have to beat Marina. That's the reality. If she doesn't get to her top form, she ain't going to beat Marina.
Absolutely. Well, Jono, thank you very much. While we've got a little bit of extra time, anything else on the day from the stable of yours that you think is worth including? You've got, in the back end, you've got Future Swing and Triple Time. Those are 2 talented 3-year-olds.
I think Justin's probably his best runner on the day would probably be Future Swing. I think he's well weighted, he's got a good draw, and I think, you know, a little bit disappointing as well last time out. I think he's better than that run. But I think he's probably Justin's best. And then, you know, a value bet for, he would probably say One Way Traffic at 25-1. Not that he should be those odds come Saturday. I think after this show, he might shorten a lot, but I think he's good value.
Well, there we go. If you haven't managed to catch the bumper carryover pick 6 or the carryover quartet in the Hollywoodbets Cape Guineas, the last race would be Future Swing. The Snaith stable think he's capable of running a big race. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing everybody out at Hollywoodbets Kenilworth for what could be the race of the century. See you there. Happy playing and good luck when you play your pick 6.